Awesome. Well, I think the numbers are starting to settle down, so I'm going to officially get us going. I don't want to make everybody wait too long. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our first collaborative panel for 2023 with TurnItIn. And I'm Michael Cowling, Professor Michael Cowling, if you want to be formal, from Central Queensland University. I wore my CQ shirt for you today, but also Vice President of ASCILITE as well, which is Australia's big educational technology focused association. And we've been working with TurnItIn for a couple of years now on collaborative webinars. And so TurnItIn approached us again this year and said, hey, let's do another one. And so we decided that we would do a webinar on artificial intelligence in education, which is a big topic, obviously, at the moment. People are thinking about it a lot. And in particular, I think in higher education, we're thinking about this, the perspectives on the impact of artificial intelligence on education. And so I'd like to say thank you first and foremost to TurnItIn for helping us to organize this webinar. And you might be in webinar mode, but you might not see it, but I can see the numbers absolutely jumping up, which is very exciting that everybody is so excited to come along to this webinar. And so we're going to start, as we often do in Australia, and I'm not sure where everybody is, but in Australia, it is common for us to do an acknowledgement of country to start a presentation. And so I'm going to do that, and I'm going to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands on which we're meeting and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging as well. And if you're in Australia, or indeed, even if you're not in Australia, but you have traditional owners of the land that you're in New Zealand or the US or wherever it might be, feel free to type in the chat what lands you're from and who you're acknowledging. Here, I'm on the Gold Coast, so that is the Ugambeh Nation here on the Gold Coast, but of course we're across all sorts of different parts of the world, so feel free to type it here. I can see it happening in the chat as I do it, so that's awesome. So let's move on and have a quick chat about ASCILITE, a very, very quick introduction to ASCILITE. So in case you haven't heard of ASCILITE, what ASCILITE is an association here in Australia that focuses on educational technology, or alternatively, you might call it technology enhanced learning. And this slide is actually slightly out of date. It actually says 1,200 professional academic staff. We're almost 2,000 professional and academic staff now across Australia focused on this area of technology enhanced learning. And we do a whole bunch of things related to that, including an annual conference, which is very popular. Our last one was in Sydney at Luna Park underneath the Harbour Bridge. And we have a community mentoring program, we have a podcast, we have a blog, we have a publication platform. And then you might have also heard of our journal, the Australasian Journal of Educational Technology, or AJET for short. We also have, and this is important for a second, a set of special interest groups. And at the moment, you can see them on the slide there on the bottom left, 7 special interest groups focused on various areas of technology enhanced learning. So learning analytics, learning design, mobile learning. I won't read the whole lot, but you can see the list there. And what we're going to do today is you're going to get an opportunity to meet some of the leaders of those special interest groups. And of course, if you're then interested in joining one of those special interest groups, I'm sure those leaders, if you sent them an email, would be happy to talk to you about joining the SIGs. Similarly, if you go, oh, ASCILITE sounds really exciting and you want to join ASCILITE, then we're happy for you to do that too. And the URL is down there on the bottom of the slide, ascilite.org, or alternatively, you can scan that QR code and that'll take you to ASCILITE's website. The other thing I should mention is that we actually have quite a lot of institutional members now of ASCILITE. So, you know, University of Melbourne and Monash University and University of Queensland. And so it may be worthwhile checking whether or not your institution's already a member, in which case you can get on the list for free. It doesn't cost you anything to become a member. So, so you might want to investigate that. I mentioned the conference, and that's the last thing I'm going to say before I tell you who's here, who we've got from ASCILITE that's going to talk to you today in our panel. But before we do that, I do want to mention that we do have an upcoming conference in 2023 that we'd love you to come and join us for, which is in Christchurch, in New Zealand. And at the moment, we're not quite calling for papers, but very close to calling for papers for that conference. And we'd love to have people come along. So if you want to find out more, go to the website, which is always, the year conference.ascilite.org, 2023 conference.ascilite.org, and that will take you to the website, and you can find out a little bit more about our conference. But anyway, enough of a plug for ASCILITE. That's the plug for ASCILITE. What I want to do today is introduce you to our panelists. And somebody in the chat said, are we going to have the slides? And the answer is no, because there really aren't that many slides. But instead, what we're going to do is we're going to share the recording afterwards. And so keep an eye on the ASCILITE bulletin. And if you're an ASCILITE member, we'll share that recording, or of course, TurnItIn will also share that recording as well, I'm sure. But there aren't really that many slides. Instead, what we have is we have 4 panelists that are going to talk to you about artificial intelligence in education and what it means for their various areas of expertise, as well as for TurnItIn as well, as we have a TurnItIn panelist as well. So in order, or in no particular order, I should say, here our 4 panelists are first and foremost Dr. Mathew Hillier. He's an e-assessment academic from Macquarie University, runs the Transforming Assessment Special Interest Group for ASCILITE, has been an ASCILITE member for many years. So welcome, Mathew. We have Leanne Ngo. She's an associate professor for online programs at La Trobe University and involved with, and I'm going to get this wrong, the learning design SIG, Leanne. I always get learning design and learning analytics mixed up. She'll correct me, I'm sure, but is at La Trobe University in Melbourne. So Matthew's in Sydney, Macquarie University is in Sydney. La Trobe University is Melbourne. Leanne told us it's cold and rainy in Melbourne at the moment, but that's just Melbourne, right? And then we have Danielle Logan-Fleming from Griffith University, in particular, learning and teaching consultant in arts, education and law at Griffith University. And he's here representing the business education SIG, but has a very wide range. So I think she'll talk to us about things apart from business education. And then finally, we have Eric Wang, who we're very excited to have from TurnItIn. He is a vice president, and in particular, their vice president of artificial intelligence. And so the man on the ground thinking about artificial intelligence for TurnItIn, which I suspect is one of the reasons that some of you are here, is to hear what TurnItIn's doing. And I'm sure that Eric will share some of that with us as we go along. And then finally, we have our moderator, who is Chucks, who is going to try and wrangle all of those academic cats that I just told you about. And so I'll hand over to Chucks now to get us started. Thank you.
Many thanks, Michael, and welcome everybody. I'll be just laying some ground rules. We've got the Q&A session. Yes, the chat is available, just having conversations amongst yourself. What I'll encourage is, while we're having when I pose the questions to the panelists, feel free to have a dialogue about your thoughts on the responses as well, and put your questions in the Q&A session. We hope that we have enough time to go through as many questions. So I'm going to kick off by throwing my first question to Leanne. We know we're all here talking about artificial intelligence and what the impact it's having in the educational landscape. So Leanne, now with the evolution of AI written work, and I know that you work as part of the learning design SIG at ASCILITE. Now, how do educators ensure that students are actually learning effectively? I get a lot of these questions in my LinkedIn because artificial intelligence is changing how we do things. So how do educators ensure that students are learning effectively and particularly meeting learning outcomes?
Thanks, Chuck. Look, that's a great question and a tricky one to respond to at the moment. And given you've been giving like a lot of questions from the audience as well and from LinkedIn. Look, this is a tricky one. But my thoughts are, as you say, like everyone knows, the emergence of AI written work poses obviously new challenges, but I'm excited by the opportunities that it also affords as well when it comes to learning and meeting learning outcomes. We know that the evolution of these AI tools, the progression in terms of its evolution is just so efficient and the speed is very progressive. And I can see that it does help with providing equitable learning as well. And I can say that from my own personal experience as well. I'm dyslexic as well. Writing, I take 5 times as long as everyone else, to do. But the opportunities that it affords to a variety of diverse people is quite positive. But however, these writing tools, they often lack the emotional intelligence, the creativity, that personal touch, that human touch that we can bring, to the table. So one of the things that my advice is educators, given that, these tools are just, evolving at such light speed, it's important for us as educators to stay aware of, the progression. We need to be vigilant about how it is designed, the ethics about it as well, how it's implemented. I know, look, these tools, there's information out there, how it's implemented within your organization as an institution. We also need to pay potential, awareness to the actual potential biases these tools can create. And bear in mind, whilst ChatGPT is the most popular one that's out there, and I think 3 or 4 months down, I think we can see tens and thousands of variations of that. And it's important for us as educators to stay up to date and also think about the privacy and ethics behind that as well. However, from a learning and learning outcomes perspective, when we're looking at learning design, I think we need to think about this as part of, it's going to be pervasive, it's here to stay, that we think about the learning process and how that's incorporated into the formative learning process. And I think we'll touch more about that later. But however, the opportunities that it affords with self and peer assessment, collaborative projects, authentic assessments, group discussions, whether it's online or face-to-face, it will help us look at fostering a deeper understanding, of the subjects for our students at the end of the day. So just to give you an example, if we were looking at, communications or written work as an example, as learning outcomes. So if we were to look at a first year foundation unit of subject that has writing skills as part of the learning outcomes in there, we could potentially look at utilizing these AI writing tools as assistance for students, in a sense, to look at mastering these concepts. So in a sense, as educators, we can shift our focus from correcting, grammatical, mechanical errors to fostering, the greater, deeper critical thinking, creativity, and more development of these ideas as well. So ones that can just lead us to more richer, more nuanced, discussions and a better understanding of where our students and who they are coming from as well.
Oh, perfect. I think you set the stage for a really rich conversation. I know a lot of people want to hear about what TurnItIn has to do. So I'm just gonna wait a little bit and keep upvoting that question. But I want to do a quick segue to Mathew and talking about all things about equitable learning, equitable assessment. Now, with the emergence of artificial intelligence, or what does the emergence of artificial intelligence mean for assessment and especially academic integrity?
Sure. I mean, artificial intelligence is probably thrown the cat in the pigeons, really, in the proverbial pigeons in terms of assessment design. We went through the pandemic. That was perhaps a relatively minor change compared to what I think we're facing with this. Policy-wise, all institutions should be looking at their academic integrity policies. What are their workflows for thinking about academic integrity education? What are they doing about reporting? How are they gathering evidence? What does the policy say about it? When people come to make decisions, if it's not written in the policy, it makes it very hard for the decision makers. So updating those policies to keep them current. What was the other part of the question? The whole impact on integrity means you need to rethink. So the affordances, the capabilities of this technology, it can produce a relatively good first draft of an essay. Does that mean we need to stop teaching students essays? Probably not, but they may have a different place in our system. I mean, the idea of rethinking the characteristics. So we've got a short-term timeline where people have to deal with the advent of AI in the current session, where they may not be able to change their assessments, versus medium and longer-term pictures where assessments should evolve to adapt and include the existence of these tools. There's a whole big piece around AI literacy that I'll probably touch on a bit later.
I think maybe this is a good time to touch on that, because I'm seeing a lot of chatter about what you just mentioned with regards to policy changes and rethinking assessment. But how do you see this change or the introduction of artificial intelligence informing things like assessment design and delivery? And what are your suggestions on some strategies, especially as we need to ensure assessments are secure, and especially safeguarding against cheating?
Yeah, I mean, the whole is it secure thing and how do I design it for it to be AI proof is really only a very short-term solution. The speed of development of this technology is such that whatever we design, or we think, oh, we've got an AI proof assessment, in a few months' time, that information is probably now out of date. In fact, I published on the Macquarie's Teach blog series around advice for tweaking your assessments. And when GTP4 came out, I think, okay, a few of those points are now invalid, right? So the idea of trying to develop AI proof assessments, I think, is a losing strategy, really. What we need to be doing is thinking about the role of these generative AI tools are going to be in the education system, in the professional work situation, and to start integrating the use of these tools into the way assessments are done, right? Think about authentic assessment design from that point of view. How do we authentically include the tools into the design? Now, having said that, there is a place for, checking lower order knowledge. Students need to know their stuff in order to be able to evaluate the output of generative AI tools, for example. So, there is a place for that, but I think we've probably been doing too much of it. And I know there's a question coming up later about exams, so I'll leave that one separate. But thinking about how these tools are going to be used in the professions, in workplace, in life, and thinking about how that then informs a new way of designing or a new assessment. So you may have students critique outputs, you may have them use it as a first draft, you may have used them for an ideation tool, but building that into the way the assessment is done and being sure as an educator that you are clear to your students, particularly in these early days, about when and how AI tools can and cannot be used in each assessment task. Because different tasks will have different, aims and learning outcomes you're trying to hit. And sometimes AI tool use may not be appropriate for that particular scenario, but a lot of the times, hopefully it will be. And as we move forward into the future, more and more of those times will be here. Yes, you should be able to use, and here's how you do it. And again, that's where I come back to this piece about AI literacy, everything from ethics to effective use to critical evaluation of output to awareness of where it fits in workflows. And I'll stop there, otherwise I'll keep talking for hours.
Yeah, I think I would like to, if you can, share the link to the resource you developed, like you mentioned earlier. I think these are
sure. I'll pop them in the chat.
Collaborate across the space and see how things are working. So thank you for mentioning that. I want to move a little bit further, and I know you talked about they need to rethink assessment, but for Danielle, we know that there's a lot of information out there, okay? And Danielle, I'm just going to do a quick plug for Danielle because she's done some really fascinating work around oral assessments and how we can use oral assessment, interactive oral assessment. I have to be very clear about saying it's interactive because oral assessment can just mean anything. Interactive oral assessment as ways to engage students in learning, and as also look at strategies on how to ensure students are not cheating. But for this today's conversation, how can educators pivot and stay up to date with technology advancements whilst needing to still uphold that level of originality in terms of student work?
Yes, thanks, Chuck, very much. That's a great question, and it really addresses the elephant in the room a little bit here. Generative artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, GPT-4, and now ChatGPT+. With all of this, we're seeing an innovation that is significant enough that history will likely view it as a catalyst of widespread, rapid social change. That's my belief. It's quite a significant change here. Now, historically, these times of rapid social change that pose a wicked problem are uncomfortable and can be really isolating. And as humans, a sense of belonging is really important to us. And the decision whether to engage in an innovation, embrace it, and stay up to date with the developments, particularly in technology, is influenced greatly by those of us or those in our various communities and networks and their response. See, no one really likes to be the only one. So joining communities where there's discussions being held is really paramount to building our own capability and importantly, a shared resilience. Now, this is a great example of mutualism that we can borrow from the natural world. Much like the bush bees in my backyard have a symbiotic relationship with the lime tree, by staying abreast of technology advancements and participating in practice sharing, we will all build our own capability and confidence with this new technology, as well as support evolving practice. Now, there's a lot of chatter on this topic at the moment, and it can be really overwhelming. And I'm certainly hearing that from the academics I work with. Much of this discussion is very technical and it's filled with acronyms. So what can we do to stay abreast of the most important information? And my advice is to look for educational technology-based networks. Join them, sign up to the newsletters, and keep an eye on the conversation specifically regarding advancements in generative AI. Now, to do this without becoming overwhelmed, set up an inbox rule based on keywords in your mailbox to sort out a daily feed of news items that will keep you up to date on advancements and technologies itself, and also with the conversations about adoption of in education, practice, academic integrity, and design. And then let the takeaways from this desktop reading and research that you're doing and your attendance in sessions like today filter down through the various levels of discussion that you're involved in until it reaches your own content and assessment design. So internationally, there's webinars like we have today that ASCILITE put on, and also Transforming Assessment hosts regularly. Within your university, locate the minutes of working parties and committees discussing AI, assessment policy and practice, and academic integrity. And then within your discipline, if you don't have one already, consider creating your own community of practice on learning and teaching design, where you can test your thinking as you work together to construct new practice that is specific to your design, your discipline's needs. Now, wherever possible, consider inviting a learning and teaching consultant such as myself to support these conversations too, because we can often offer exemplars of AI-related practice from across the organisation and help disseminate ideas that have worked for others or that might be being developed elsewhere. When you meet regularly within your discipline community of practice, it will allow you to explore the design and delivery of discipline-specific content and assessment that maintains rigor and originality, and that are scaffolded and program-aligned and informed by the latest technological advancements. And if you can, consider also including students as partners opportunities as well in your course discussions also. This is incredibly important to build the students' own transversal skills in digital and assessment literacy to better enhance their employment down the track.
Wow, that is a long list of really rich strategies to actually succeed in this space, and continue to do phenomenal work. I particularly like the need for community, because community is one of the ways we can actually harness the knowledge in different pockets across the globe. Now we're going to go over to Eric. Eric, there is a question that's burning and has a lot of votes, but I don't want to start there. I do have a question because this is an AI, we're looking at the perspectives or sort of understanding the impact in this space. What might educators do right now to address the uptake of AI writing tools by students? And whilst you're discussing that, maybe you can address the first question around the false positives and the reliability of AI detection in TurnItIn. I'm guessing you're referring to TFS, similarity, originality, all the products that will have this level of detection.
So thank you so much for that question. So first of all, just for transparency's sake, how does our detector work? It's actually just me reading and typing furiously. So apologies if I'm asleep, it takes a little longer. In all seriousness, I think Danielle hit on one of the most important points, and I want to get to the efficacy of our detector here in a second. But the most important thing to remember is that detection is an imperfect science, as many of the these other amazing panelists have said, this technology is new. The world that it is creating is new. It's going to belong to the students that are in our classrooms more than it belongs to us. The order of the order of magnitude of change that we're seeing is from conversations that we're having, and I understand I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it's a little bit of a bubble, but the order of magnitude of change that we're seeing is more akin to the taming of fire, the invention of agriculture, than it is to a new iPhone. And we need to recognize that. This is a social moment. And so what that means, community, that resonates to me, what Danielle just said. I think the most important thing is that the responsibility, the ownership of the guidelines, of the community policies, the standards that we all uphold one another to, students, instructors, administrators, should be shared. The discussions should be open. There should be town halls, if you can facilitate it in your institution, where students are welcomed to bring their points of view forward. And I think you'll find that students, for the most part, deeply value academic integrity. They deeply value the time they've invested and spent at school. And they will help create really powerful, meaningful policies and guidelines that they also feel a deep sense of ownership about. And that, I think, is the root of great academic integrity. Kind of riding on the back of that is transparency. So our detector is a fantastic detector based on our internal testing. And I'm not just saying that because we worked on it and built it. Based on our internal testing, it's the safest. It is the most effective detector. It's the one that's going to provide the best insights. It's designed from the outset as a detector for instructors, right? So a little bit of high-level overview. What we set the operating point. So for those of you that have AI knowledge, when you build a classifier, you sort of have to choose an operating point. We chose the operating point, and we consistently have chosen operating points that value student safety as the absolute top priority. And so in that, some of the numbers that we can talk about at the document level, we have about 98% precision. So when we say this document contains a non-trivial amount of AI writing, the precision is 98%. That results in a less than 1% false positive rate, right? And I know that's not zero. I understand that, and we'll get back to that in just a second. And that number is very, very important. And above all, from an effectiveness standpoint, it's about 85% recall. So that means that through our tests of real-world data, as for every 100 documents that we fed through that have a significant amount of AI writing, defined in our case as about 20% or more, 85% get flagged. And so if you were a bad actor, which is rare, let's be very clear, there's very few people who are truly trying to beat or game the system. If you're a bad actor, the odds are not in your favor. That is first and foremost. As a detector, as a deterrent, that's true. Now, let's step away from that for a second, because again, most students really, really want to learn. They want to grow. Sometimes they make a mistake. Sometimes there's a lapse in judgment. Sometimes they're crunched for time. So what we try to help teachers understand is that this tool is imperfect, but it's very good. And when it points you toward a sentence or a passage or a paragraph that says, this statistically looks like AI writing, I think the right thing to do is to sit down with a student and ask them questions about that section of writing. Don't launch into it. I wouldn't anyway, launch into it with TurnItIn says an AI wrote this, explain yourself. Instead, I think it's a good opportunity to say, hey, you know what, this thought is kind of interesting. Now, full transparency, the detector said you might have used some AI here, but let's talk about your thought here. How do you feel about that? And let's analyze it, let's dissect it. And if the student absolutely says, I didn't use AI, well, that's one path that you might have to walk down. But I think you'll find a lot of times students are going to say, you know what, the guidelines are unclear and I got stuck and I'm really not sure what to write. So yeah, I have ChatGPT and I plugged it in and it felt pretty good. That's an opportunity to then have a conversation about the role of this technology in writing, in creation of new knowledge. And you can turn it into a very formative experience. And it truly, honestly, is a formative experience for all of us, educators, ed tech professionals, students. We're building the world together. We are literally on an airplane and we're building the airplane and we're taking off, and there is no way of landing this now. So we're in the air and we have to make it fly. And it really is going to take all of us coming together.
Thanks. I know you talked about the 98% confidence, and I'm just making sure we've responded to Pat Laurier's question with regards to false positive and the reliability of AI detection in TurnItIn. If there's any other question following Eric's response, feel free to re-ask the question. I want to just get a sense of a response from Leanne as well, because Eric has responded from his experience working with the labs and trying to make sure that this is adopted or sort of used to encourage dialogue with students. Leanne, what are your thoughts on looking at it from maybe a learning design experience, or maybe the teaching process, and how educators, what they can do right now to address this uptake of AI writing tools by students?
Look, thanks, Chuck. And I think it's been mentioned briefly in Danielle's response as well, and I kind of mentioned it earlier. I think the key thing as an educator right now, we know these generative AI tools exist and it's here to stay. There's no argument about that, right? And I think one of the key, most simple advice is, if you're an educator in a university or an educational provider kind of setting, go out and use the tool. Get yourself knowledge up, be aware, stay informed of the capabilities of these tools and up to date. There are tens and thousands of these tools, and obviously everyone can't stay up to date with tens and thousands. It will go into the hundreds and millions in a short time frame. Build your networks, stay connected as well. There are obviously, you know, community of practices, there's teaching and learning support people who are tasked at the moment in every single institution to actually go off and stay up to date with these tools and the implications, and look at the implications for teaching and learning. So there are teaching and learning support designers, academic developers currently looking at this at the moment. So you're not on your own, and don't just rely internally, look externally. And Danielle has gone off and mentioned that as well and provided great opportunities. The ASCILITE, I co-lead the learning design ASCILITE group as well with Keith and Kashmira. We've got a whole heap of learning designers who are in this space, and Mathew and Danielle also leads under SIGs as well that have expertise. So go out there and share and build each other's knowledge. Definitely, I will echo, as an educator, you have to have transparency in your class. If you're not teaching right now in your class, or if you are, you've taught already, be transparent and open, build trust with your students. What AI tools can't do is have that personal connection, that emotional connection with your students at the end of the day. Build that trust, that growth mindset in your class as well. Be open with the questions. We're all in this together. You know, reach out, and it's a two-way process with that as well. So, you know, I just want to say, you know, AI writing tools, it needs to be incorporated as part of the learning process. We need to know what the implications of it is. It should be supplementing rather than replacing what we do going forward. And we need to obviously, you know, think about how it could be used responsibly and effectively down the track. But be open, reach out, and have an open conversation about it. That's my most simple advice to educators out there.
Yeah, it's all about the community. Yeah, Eric.
Chuck, can I jump in for real quick? I love Leanne's point, and I wanted to piggyback off of that too. Is, you know, there was a question I just saw pass by in the chat of, you know, some of these techniques of talking to students and really deeply understanding their questions or their answers. That doesn't scale when you're teaching freshman seminar, except recognizing that ChatGPT as a tool isn't just a threat to academic integrity. At TurnItIn, we're already starting to think about it and use these technologies to improve our productivity. And I think as teachers, there's areas where you can actually, it does a remarkable job of being able to pull different answers together, pull out common themes from 100 different short answers. These are innovative uses of it from an educator perspective that we're really starting to see some of the more innovative educators start to lean into this tool as potentially a game changer. It starts to scale questions that didn't scale before. Short answer questions suddenly become viable in large classes when they weren't. Being able to give feedback across large groups of essays. These are things that are, they're imperfect, and we have to learn how to prompt and use these AIs. But, to Leanne's point of using these AIs, figuring out how to use them in our workflows, in our day-to-day life, is actually a great way to practice and understand the capabilities that they have.
Yeah, I think you raise a good point. I think it's a really good segue, but I'm going to tee up Matt and Mathew and Danielle to just get ready to respond to a question from Cassandra. But before we get to that, I want to really touch on the evolution of ChatGPT. We're now getting into GPT-4. So now with AI writing detection to be launched by TurnItIn in April, obviously a lot of people talking about it already in the questions and in the chat. What are your thoughts on how educators can engage with the technology to inform that level of further development, and what's next for the development in this space? And maybe talk about with how we're currently on GPT 3.5, but hopefully what's coming up with GPT-4. Eric.
Yeah, so the space is evolving very, very quickly. Really interested to hear some of the other panelists as well. So I've been in AI for a while, and we're moving at a pace, we're evolving and moving forward at a pace that is dizzying, is unlike anything that's happened before. I think with GPT-4, what we're seeing is that the main improvement over GPT 3.5 has been its ability to simulate reasoning. And I'm using the word simulate very deliberately here. I'm not necessarily sure it's actually reasoning, but it's the reinforcement engine on top of the actual generative model seems much more powerful than GPT 3.5's. And so what we've seen is actually its ability to do things far beyond writing is improved. Its ability to write code, its ability to do complex chemistry and math problems correctly. In America, it scores in the top 90th percentile of the bar exam, right? Which is kind of a big deal. So you start seeing that this technology isn't just changing the way we write. It's changing the way we potentially think. It's changing the way we create content. It's going to start changing the way that we interact with one another. It's approaching that level of quality. So, I think some of the changes that we really need to start thinking about societally is AI fluency, partnering with AI, collaborating and creating with AI is going to become an important skill. That'll be part of our curriculums going forward. So that's something that we're looking for. From an integrity perspective, we see potential challenges to integrity. So the same reinforcement engine, the instruction tuning that sits on top of these large language models could potentially be used to align these large language models to a particular style, or at least to not be detectable, right? We definitely stay on top of that as an AI team. That's something those are directions that we are always keeping an eye on and doing our own R&D on. But those are things that we think about. More broadly, I think there's a couple of areas too that things that aren't completely fixed with this new generation of large language models that as educators from an integrity perspective, we can kind of cue in on. GPT-4, as powerful as it is, still tends to hallucinate. And what hallucination means is it confidently makes stuff up. And that's even true when it's plugged into a search or knowledge database like Bing. So if any of you have access to the Bing GPT-4, it still gets things wrong much less frequently than base GPT-4 without access to the internet. But it's not a non-zero rate. So again, as an educator, when you stumble across a student's writing that is confidently asserting a fact that you know to be wrong, that's another great opportunity to dig in. When you find a citation or reference that doesn't quite line up, that's another opportunity to dig in. So yeah, I mean, I think I wish I could see farther into the future. I have thoughts, but at that point, it starts to become opinions and things probably worth discussing over a beer. But definitely massive change coming in just the next 12 to 24 months.
Excellent. Quick question, and this before we get into the assessment question. There are a number of questions that have come through. I'm afraid we're not going to be able to touch on all of them. I may send these to the panelists to do a written response, and we could do a send out to everyone who's registered for this session. But we're just I'll try to merge them into the questions that are already pre-planned as we go. So just letting everyone know that's upfront. Now, for Mathew, there's a conversation with regards to reverting back to exams and going back to paper-based or even in-class assessments. What are the implications on student experience?
Yeah, look, I think that's on one hand, it's a reasonable human response to go back to what you know. In fact, to remove any technology out of the equation as a way of avoiding the problem. But I think there are the negative consequences of that, going back to, say, pen on paper assessments in large exam halls. It's long been a thing that this mode of assessment is relatively inauthentic to the way that people work in the modern world. You know, they use digital tools of the trade to solve problems as human capability multipliers. So if we want to be able to assess students' capability to be able to perform in a future career, even as a day one capability, then, you know, technology enhanced assessment, I think, is one of those places we need to be looking at. Now, yeah, sure, technology comes with issues. There's no doubting it. But if we just, you know, give up the ghost, put our head in the sand and say, well, we're going back to pen on paper exams, that'll fix that wagon, I think it's a step backwards. So, you know, that wouldn't be my advice. Granted, there is place for in-class assessments. There is in place for such things. But I think traditionally, universities, I'm speaking here in Australia, have relied on the traditional pen and paper exam way too much as a high stakes form of assessment. There are other ways, and you know, Danielle's interactive online oral assessments, in my mind, is one of those methods that sort of hits the nail on the head with authenticity, scalability, and integrity components that are in that assessment design. So thinking about how we can redevelop those assessments to assess the learning outcomes. You know, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to work out if the student knows their stuff and can perform and solve problems. We don't have to use a pen on paper exam to achieve that. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Mathew. Danielle, would you like to talk to Cassandra's questions? I know you do some really fascinating work on interactive oral assessment, but what different specific assessment types, or maybe talk about that as an equivalent in terms of how you may use AI in different disciplines, for example?
Yeah, thanks, Chucks. Look, I think with the capability of the new AI tools, there are some limitations, and that will be overcome, as have been mentioned. I subscribe to scaffolded authentic assessments, and where possible including an interactive oral, because anytime you get to have a one-on-one or one-on-few conversation with your students, you're going to be able to assure yourself of their learning in ways that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Now, when you have at least one of those assessments in your particular course, what it does is help, particularly where it's scaffolded, it helps protect the academic integrity of the others, because if you have contract cheating, or you're cheating or using AI in any earlier assessments, it's very difficult when you haven't actually written something yourself to be able to speak very authentically about it, particularly within a scenario. So an interactive oral isn't an oral exam. It isn't a viva voce exam. It is a genuine unscripted conversation within an industry aligned or discipline aligned scenario setting. And I've put some information and a resource up in the chat about that. But listen, in business education, we're seeing a lot of different types of assessments that involve multiple steps: higher order thinking, judgments, evaluations, and creativity. The use of really recently created materials, or local or specialized examples, very discipline specific examples, and interestingly, asking students to create artifacts that are perhaps more authentic than what we've had in the past in terms of essays and reports and things. For example, I know of a number of colleagues who ask their students to create virtual tours of multiple pieces of information and create that. They are creating infographics, they're creating reverse engineered case studies, they're creating visuals, or regularly submitting logbooks, peer discussions, check-ins, portfolios, those sorts of things. So there's multiple steps to assure the students' progress along the way. Thinking outside the scope of what we have done to scalable yet more authentic models of assessment is, I think, the key here. And that's where those conversations in the community that I was suggesting before, get together with your discipline, have a conversation about how this learning would be actually used in industry, and then help look at artifacts the students could create that are multi-steps, that involve multi-steps that will help you assure their learning. The other key element here is also marking time. So we do need to make sure that we're designing for the marking to also be able to be done in an efficient way. And that's where really returning to quality rubrics and getting that kind of support there will help a great deal as well.
Yes, you've mentioned some really, really valid points. I think one of the ones I would offer as a former learning designer is rethink your rubrics. It's very important to rethink the rubrics. We're just going to move on to, I think Leanne would agree with most of what Danielle has said, but I just want to, for Leanne to just give us a quick helicopter learning design strategy. Can you share some tips, tactics, and strategies for reimagining teaching and learning methodologies, especially with the evolution of AI?
Look, I think from a helicopter broad perspective, I think, it's kind of been mentioned before, but I'll reinforce this. We have an opportunity to transform our curricula. It's there. I mean, universities have been talking about transforming assessment, learning, their curricula for many years. And I think if we don't do this right now, we're going to be bulldozed over like a train, hitting our way. So it's definitely an opportunity. And, echoing everyone's view, we need to look at a course-based approach, scaffolded, interconnected approach. And I think it's absolutely critical that we look at the authentic assessment. And this is where, as educators, as course directors, even the university or discipline heads, needs to be paying attention what is happening outside in industry as well. Industry, they're using it. So I'm in the cybersecurity, IT computing industry. They're already using it already, and how they could, make things more efficient and, increase productivity. From a learning design perspective, learning designers, we are using it to generate ideas, course outline, curricula, etc. So for educators, if you're a course director or a subject coordinator, pay attention to what's being used out there as well. Think about it, as a broad perspective, scaffolded approach to this. But can I also say, from looking outside as well, it's a great opportunity to rethink how we design our courses. Do we look at embedding in a growth mindset? I mentioned that earlier, emphasizing the value of effort, perseverance, and, learning from mistakes. We're in this world, we're learning things together, providing constructive feedback and encouraging students, to view challenges as opportunities for growth. Don't fear this, we're all in this together. And then one day we beat COVID, so that's kind of my view for that aspect as well. But also knowing that, recognizing that everyone's all different. So with the course, I think there's an opportunity to look at it from an inclusive point of view, where we can adopt culturally responsive teaching approaches to the way we work as well, and acknowledge and respect that there is diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, learning styles, and perspectives out there, not just for students, but as educators, the way that we work as well. And it's important that we create this inclusive, learning environment both ways. Everyone's all adults in that aspect, and encourage, open dialogue, collaboration, mutual understanding, that co-design approach, not just with educators and students, but with recent alumni, graduates, industry folks out there, professional associations. Let's work together. We are doing this at the moment, and I think industry is already using it, and it's almost like we need to catch up as educators within an educational institution to embracing this and looking at how we can leverage this going forward. I think I read somewhere someone was saying it's like this generative AI is like fingernails growing, and it will always grow, it will always evolve, no matter how many times we cut it, it will continue to evolve very quickly as well. And that's where we need to be just on the ball on this.
Thank you. Those are really, really rich points. I'm very conscious that we've got about 8 minutes, and I did want to do a wrap up, but I'm also very curious that there's still some conversation with regards to ChatGPT, GPT-4, and how we're evolving as a company. So my maybe potential last question will be to Eric. You've already talked about how we're going to work with the evolution of GPT-4 as we develop our product, but maybe can you speak to the importance of data privacy and our approach, and what that means for every customer or any educator who's currently using a TurnItIn product?
So data privacy is something that is very, very important to TurnItIn. The trust of our customers and the trust of our users is the currency that we trade in, right? We operate in the space of trust. So data is always held very closely by the company. When we have used it, we use data to improve the services that help safeguard academic integrity, especially in the changing face of a lot of these technologies. What I will say is, as we've built our detector, we've leveraged our 20 years of experience in building these detectors. We've really focused on understanding the student voice. So as we built the detectors, we've carefully used data and balanced it. I saw an article, a chat that went by about bias, garbage in, garbage out. And then for a lot of AI, that's very much the case. I would say it's a little bit less the case, or subtly different in some ways with large language models, but certainly we recognize from a detector perspective, using the right data, being good caretakers and being good stewards of the data, and respecting the various regional laws around privacy and data storage and where it can move and how it can move. So we've worked really hard to build a detector that really represents the student voice well. And so in our testing, it's pretty robust to all of the different possible ways that it's going to kind of exist in the wild. And then you mentioned GPT-4. I just wanted to add one more thought. Obviously, GPT-4 is far more powerful. It can be prompted in more ways, but all of these large language models, they have what we call base voice. And a base voice is when you ask the GPT-4 and GPT 3.5, please write me an essay about this topic, whatever that topic is. What I will say is internally, we have not seen that GPT-4 exhibits significant drift from GPT 3.5. Now, that means what we will tell our customers is that, we think this is the right tool, that what we're releasing is the right tool. It's trained on GPT 3.5. It's targeted on GPT 3.5. GPT-4's base voice doesn't necessarily concern us too much, but we need to recognize that the potential of GPT-4 is far greater than GPT 3.5. Its ability to mimic style, its ability to write with greater sophistication and statistical style that potentially requires us to rethink how we think about detection and integrity is there. And we're definitely keeping an eye on that. And we're going to make sure we use data responsibly, but also in the right ways to bring, to help us continue to have the right conversations on academic integrity. Perfect.
We do have 4 minutes. I'm going to get Danielle to do a quick wrap up, but before we get to that, we're just going to put up a slide just showing some very helpful resources we've developed in-house alongside some educators. So feel free to either grab a link in the chat or use the QR code on your screen right now. To wrap up these really rich conversations, I want to applaud everyone for engaging. There's so much I literally haven't looked at the chat because it's a lot coming through, but thanks to the panelists for responding where you can and for jumping on the live questions. The Q&A section, like I said, we'll try and retrieve that and get some responses from the panelists and send that out to everyone who's attended. But to wrap up, Danielle, how do you see AI writing informing best practice for learning and teaching, and more broadly, policies or changes if required? We've talked a little bit about that along the way, but just to bring everything together.
That's a great question, Chuck. How do I see it informing? During the pandemic, the change that came about in practice in even the first 12 months, the first couple of years where we all had to pivot online, in learning design terms and in learning design circles, we spoke about it being worth almost 5 years of normal time in terms of the upskilling and the massive change and conversation and improvement that happened to learning during that time. Now, that was really quite significant, and it was quite a once in a generation moment, really. I see this as being very similar, but beyond that, as I mentioned before, I think it's a time of social change. This is, Eric has said the same thing, this is a time that we will look back on, and a bit like when we first went from typewriters to computers. You know, it's going to really revolutionize what we're doing. Can we avoid it? For a little while, maybe, but why is the question. Why would we avoid it? Why would we put it off? Now, in the short term, we have some assessments, we have some things in place that are running right now that we might need to tweak a little bit to help ensure the academic integrity around them. But long term, as all of my colleagues have said, we should be evolving, we should be looking towards moving to new forms of assuring student learning and design that helps support that. And this will be a journey. As I mentioned before, it's not always a comfortable journey when change happens quite so rapidly, but do find your connections, find your community, have those conversations, keep attending sessions like today, and reach out and be a part of it, because the more you can upskill yourself, the more you can feel comfortable with the terminology and help make informed decisions, the more you'll feel a little bit more in control of what's happening in your course, in your classroom, and be able to enable your students to learn the way they need to learn to ultimately achieve their employability goals.
Perfect. Really good way to say a big thank you to all the panelists for your time today. Thank you for bringing it 100%. For everyone who's attended, I hope you stay safe. We will send out the recordings with a little bit of a survey for you to let us know how we did. And if you have an idea of what you want to see in subsequent sessions, feel free to send that through as well. Thank you again to the panelists. Thank you again to ASCILITE for this very informative session, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. Thanks, Michael and everyone, and have a great rest of the day, wherever you are.